Hay production at the Lucky 3 Ranch is an art, a science, and a continuing learning curve. One of the first things one needs to realize is that the only one who's really in charge is Mother Nature. So you'd better pay attention to her. She will dictate what you do and when to do it. The goal of the Lucky 3 Ranch is to produce the best and healthiest hay crop they can for their beloved equines, so they listen and learn. Although there are lots of different types of hay, the Lucky 3 Ranch crew has found that a brome orchard grass mix is the most nutritious and most delectable for the animals.
Mother Nature is always a whole lot of fun because she doesn't care if you're irrigating and then she decides to irrigate too. So you can end up going out in the rain.
8 years ago we had the flood there, and the following irrigation season we had a lot more silt in the water, so it backed up a lot of stuff. We had to clean out pipes and the ditches more often because there's a crap load more silt coming off all the flood that was, or the river that was built up from that flood.
Yeah, Mother Nature always has to get her 2 cents in.
So our way, not our way.
Their 112 acres for hay production was originally just one very large cornfield. It has since been segmented into a 12-acre section, a 58-acre section, a 25-acre section, and a 17-acre section. The previous owner rotated his corn crop every other year to a half-grass, half-alfalfa mix. He later sold the property to Meredith's mother, who 5 years later sold the property to Meredith. During the time when the fields were half-grass, half-alfalfa, that is what they fed the equines.
During that time, we experienced numerous problems with skin irritations, abscesses, colic, and founder. We lost a lot of animals during those years.
So the reason they removed the alfalfa from the hay fields is the alfalfa was too rich for equines in general, so it was causing a lot of issues with health, like colics and issues kind of sort of like that. It causes that problem, especially for mules and donkeys. They tend to be more desert animals, so they don't get the access to that rich food, but living in a desert, there's not much there. The way they removed it off the fields is alfalfa is a broadleaf plant, and we spray for broadleaf weeds every year. So that took care of the alfalfa. So after a couple seasons, it was eradicated off the fields.
During the early years, the Lucky 3 Ranch was forced to use a flood irrigation system. This was the way the fields were set up. The water was received from the main river through a series of irrigation ditches that delivered water to the property. On the property, the network of ditches was designed to create a free flow of water directed by gravity into the fields. Dams were inserted into different places along the ditch to direct the water flow.
We first started all of this and had nothing but, flood irrigation, and we had so many ditches running every which way according to the lay of the land.
Yep.
And it wasn't as flat as it is now.
No, we did a lot of work flattening it all out.
And so, you can set up your ditches and think it's going to do one thing, and then it turns out it's not going the way you wanted it to, and then you got to stop it, then you got to notch it somewhere else. And then, of course, you never really knew how long it was going to last because it's just kind of pouring into the field. And sometimes when it was done, it was like in the middle of the night and you needed a flashlight to see where you were going. When you're doing these ditches, they have to be a certain depth and a certain width, and you have to be able to notch the edge and build up the water so it will get pushed out onto the field.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it'll build up with silt and everything, and then we got to bring in the V-plow and clear the ditch.
Yeah, clear out the ditch and then build up the berm on the ditch too, so you have something to actually cut away so that you can flow water out. Otherwise, it just spills out everywhere. It's everything. It's depending on what the ditch does. I mean, some years we'll get a lot of silt in the water, and other years we don't. So you got to look at it, and you'll start seeing when your ditch gets shallow, you don't flow enough water. So we just play it by ear, and you cut it when you need to, and sometimes you cut it in the middle of summer once or twice even to get enough flow out of the water, because if your ditch gets too shallow, you're not moving water.
Getting back and forth on the ditches is hard too.
Some ditches are a lot wider than others, some are more narrow. This is a deep ditch.
Flows a lot of water.
We take a flashlight out there like this, or we can go ahead and use one of those miner's caps with the headlight on them.
Yeah.
Like I said, you never know when it's going to be time to change these dams. And the only way you can do it is to see how far the water has run out in the field and where it stops running and starts puddling, right, Chad?
Yeah, and you gotta stop it too before it gets to where you want it, because the water will keep flowing afterwards, and then you're just wasting water. So you need to plan for it because the water up at the ditch coming out of the ditch will still flow down. So you got to kind of prepare for that. So you got to be able to read the water and how it flows across the ground and all that, and be able to cut it off when you need to, so you're not wasting water.
There's low spots and high spots, and that's what makes it really hard, when we're doing flood irrigation, because it'll flow out onto the low spots on the field, and then the high spots don't get watered, and then the grass gets taller on the low spots, and the high spots turn brown. And you can tell when you go out there with a swath that it doesn't run smooth.
No, the ground gets bumpy.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time making sure the ground's flat and smooth, so it makes a rough ride baling and swathing if it's rough.
And it's really hard to maintain the ground that way too.
Yeah.
And then every spring or so we have to add seed to it.
Yeah.
Farmers used to rotate crops. They'd go from alfalfa grass one year and then go to corn the next year. But because we've got equines and we sell hay, we got to figure out a way to maintain this hay. So get it watered really good so we get maximum production out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, we want to maintain a good grass stand so we don't plowing it up. It's not in the plan there.
So we figured out a way that we can do that by keeping the nutrients in the ground and going ahead and making sure that we get irrigated evenly throughout the field. And that's why we decided maybe we better change from this flood irrigation and go to another system.
Mm-hmm.
And we thought the wheel line system was going to be the ticket, early on.
Yeah, but that was more maintenance than flood irrigating.
Right.
It was a lot more work.
Right.
So, and that's when we ended up on a traveling gun.
And a lot less ground erosion.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you get a lot of ground erosion with this flood irrigation.
Yeah, it puts dirt where it wants it, so.
Yep. Yeah.
Not where you want it. The ditch company that we use, they have a certain allotted amount of water every year, and it's kind of like a share with the company. In fact, it's a co-op. So we have a certain amount of shares of the allotted water that they are allowed to send down the ditch every year. So if we get lucky, we don't have to use it in the spring. If it's nice and wet, then we don't have to use that. So that allows us to put more water on in the summertime. The issue we run into is if it's a dry season or a dry spring, we run out of water before we get through the end of the year, because the Colorado's typically pretty dry and it takes a lot of water to grow the grass. So we try to use our water sparingly in the springtime, and that way we can dump it on the fields in the summertime.
The problem with this system was that the high areas had a lot of runoff and did not retain the moisture, while the low areas could sometimes get too much water and created puddles in the fields. Too little or too much water will adversely affect the quality of your hay crop.
When there was an open ditch feeding our property, we had a maintenance issue where we had to go out 3-4 times a year to clear all the weeds that would grow up naturally inside the ditch. Not only on our own property, but down the supply line as well. And the ditches, technically there's an easement on there, so the property owners where the ditch runs through, it's not their responsibility to keep the ditch clean. It falls on our shoulders to do so. Sometimes we'd have neighbors that were nice and they'd keep it clean. Other times, most of the time, we didn't have them. And so we'd have to eradicate those weeds, and we'd try to do it with chemical means as far as weed killers and stuff, but we had neighbors complain about us spraying weed killer in the ditch and everything, so we had to go to weed whackers and shovels to try to clear that out, and it just became a huge maintenance problem. We'd also burn the ditches down the road there as well to try to get a head start on keeping the grass and the weeds that grow out through there. And the neighbors don't like seeing fire in front of their property, so we'd always get complaints on that, even though we'd file for the proper permits and everything to do what we needed to do.
Fortunately, the Lucky 3 Ranch's hayfields were pretty flat, but ground shifts and changes in the surface every year altered the high and low spots. Still, the configuration of ditches was not changed. To change them that often would have been a major undertaking of wasteful cost if done every year. The summers were hot and often rainy, so looking for that special time to cut hay was really sporadic and risky. It was rarely dry long enough to get the hay put up correctly. If damp bales were stored, they could easily turn to mold and sometimes cause a fire.
Oh, some of the most common issues that we deal with Mother Nature is rain, of course. That time of year, rain is sporadic, and the weather channels and all the weather forecasting stations would say you're going to be sunny and clear, and we'll be out there, and the next thing you know, we have a thunderstorm come in there and drop a half inch of rain on us. Weather's important with hay. We need warm, dry weather to dry out the hay. We don't want to put it up wet. It needs to be at a certain humidity in the hay. And then, of course, we don't want that once it dries to get rained on, because that can cause some issues with discoloration, causing loss of nutrients in the hay. Basically makes it where the bale doesn't look as pleasing to the buyer, so we try to avoid the rain at all costs.
The equipment they had to use back then was not computerized. They were lucky when they had an enclosed cab on the swather and tractor, but there was no air conditioning, and it posed a very bumpy ride. They continuously had to get in and out of the tractor to readjust the tension on the baler to make sure the bales were of the correct tension, size, and were being ejected properly from the machine. It took days and sometimes weeks to get the hay ready to be put up in storage. Half grass, half alfalfa hay was universally advertised as the best forage for horses, mules, and donkeys. But Meredith became suspicious because of all the veterinary issues she was having with her animals. So she opted to kill off all the alfalfa in the hay fields and seed the existing grass that remained with brome and orchard grass.
I believe brome grass has more protein in it, and the orchard grass has more fiber in it, so it's a good grass for the animals to eat.
Brome and orchard grass is the preferred grass of the Lucky 3 Ranch. It's more of a cool weather grass, so we get more growth in the springtime than we do in the dead of summer when it's real hot. It's Meredith has found that it tends to be more nutritious for the equines, so that's why we use the brome and orchard grass.
Meet Sir Lancelot. This is Lucky 3 Sir Lancelot. This mule here is 28 years old. It's because of the way that we feed and manage these animals and the land that they're as healthy as they are, and that they do all the things that I ask them to do. When I first moved here in 1980, there was a cornfield out there and a hay field. My neighbor planted grass and alfalfa, took down the corn, rotating the crops, and turned it into grass and alfalfa. And I thought at the time everybody was feeding alfalfa. They said how good it was for equines and everything, but I discovered soon that it really wasn't. I lost a lot of horses over the years, and I determined it was the alfalfa that I was feeding them that was causing the colic and the twisted guts that we were getting. We plowed under and got rid of all of the alfalfa hay and went to brome and orchard grass only. When I acquired the extra acreage out there, at the time I was only on 10 acres, but I eventually got the 50 or the 70 acres and the 25 acres, and we put it all in brome and orchard grass hay and started feeding that, and they quit colicking then. The only grain that I gave them was crimped oats, and that's all I've ever fed them. But for the sake of the nutritional value, I decided to go ahead and just give them no more than 2 cups of oats fed in the evening, mixed with, for an average size saddle mule, just 1 ounce of Mazola corn oil for their coat, their hooves, and their digestive tract regularity. And I also added an old-fashioned, been around forever, vitamin supplement called Show Glow from ManaPro. And I've been feeding that for 35 years. And my animals are all going well over 30 years old and a whole lot healthier than they ever were. And now we hardly ever see the vet. We only see the vet in the springtime for vaccinations, and we see them in the fall for the boosters. We see them when we have to put an animal down or when we get a rescue in to be checked. So I can honestly say that the feed program that we use and the hay that we grow is the very, very best nutrition for all our equines, our mules, horses, donkeys, ponies, miniatures, all the same. We feed them all the same thing, but we just use different amounts. And as you can see, like I said, Lance is 28 years old. He's totally calm. He does what I ask him to do. I don't have to chase anybody on the place, and nobody gets a bellyache or anything like that. They're all very healthy, very happy, and I can attest for this program because of the field study that I've used over 40 years on 32 animals. There's a lot of people who will tell you a lot of things about nutrition and about what you should be feeding your animals, but nothing tells it like the results of the animals themselves. Use the same program with all of them. The other grains I found they are not that healthy for these guys, and like I said, a lot of people give them gallons of these things, but the other thing that's not good for them are all the little treats that are produced, horse treats, and treats that you want to give them, apples or carrots or peppermints or anything like that. But what that does is that interferes with the regularity of the digestive tract. It causes gas in the digestive tract, which is what is primarily the reason for a lot of colics. If you want to reward your animal, which I do with my reward system training, the thing to use is the same thing that you feed them, these crimped oats. And they love them, and they're good for them. And since you only feed them 2 cups a day, you can dish out quite a few, and they don't get tired of it, do you? You don't get tired of it, ever. And you'll stick your face in a fanny pack for it. Right, Lance?
If the hay was to be top quality, it would need to be barn stored. So Meredith opted to spend the money to put a roof on the old silage pit and turn it into a hay barn. Each year, she learned more and more about top quality certified hay production. Each year, the yield grew by leaps and bounds. It was eventually necessary to build a second hay barn to accommodate the increased growth of the hay crop.
The water is supplied to us from the Southside Ditch Company. They get it out of the Big Thompson River. There's a reservoir that the Southside Ditch Company owns where they store their water, and then that'll feed into our ditch, the main supply ditch, and we'll pull it off of that as we need it. We have a storage pond here that we pump our irrigation system with, that we keep a day's worth of water stored in there.
Once the hay barn was remodeled, the Lucky 3 Ranch opted to change the flood irrigation system to a side roll wheel line irrigation system to get a more even coverage over the fields. Even though this system produced a more efficient coverage over the whole field, it did not get into the corners very well, so they did retain a certain amount of flood irrigation. Keeping the wheel line straight as it rolled across the field was a real challenge. If it got crooked, it would take hours to straighten it out again.
At first, we had a flood irrigation system here, and we made the transition to a side roll that was a better system than flood irrigating. You can get the high spots and as well as the low spots, where flood irrigating just runs to low because water seeks the low spot. In order to make that transition, we had to go through and fill in all our ditches because we had cross ditches running across the field. So we had to take a tractor out there, fill everything in, and then reseed the area that was where the ditch was at.
They had to make sure the brakes were adequately set in each position because the west winds that came off the mountains and the north winds coming in with severe storms were often strong enough to send the entire system careening across the field.
Apparently there was a big gust of wind come over the mountains, and the brakes weren't put down properly with the wheel line irrigation, and it blew it across the field and wrapped it around the mobile home.
Of course, the broken wheels had to be replaced frequently. The wheel line tractor in the middle that moved the sprinkler pipes required regular motor tune-ups and greasing. Sprinkler heads were another thing that needed to be replaced often.
The difference between a side roll irrigation system and the traveling gun, the side roll, when you're using it on a smaller acreage, it's probably more beneficial than the traveling gun because it's easier to maneuver. When we have a wide field like we do here at the Lucky 3 Ranch, it becomes more of a hassle. It doesn't have the capability of rolling everything equally because the metal will start bending. So it causes more issues with trying to get everything set up to move your spots. The traveling gun, we can drag it out with a tractor, set it up, and then the water going through the gearbox will actually retrieve the hose, so we don't have anything to do besides pick it up and set it at the next location. The transition from this to the traveling gun from our old side roll system was actually pretty much over a season. We decided to eliminate it, and we had the traveling gun system put in. We made the transition to the traveling gun because it sped up and made more equal distribution of our water over our field, so we could get a better crop out of every cut.
No matter what you plan to do with any crop, one is always at the mercy of Mother Nature. Ideally, given enough time, one needs to wait for the hay to begin to grow in the spring, then fertilize the fields before it gets so tall that the tractor tires would ruin the grass. This is also a consideration with the weed killer applications.
In the beginning, the Lucky 3 Ranch used their composted horse manure for the fields and never turned out the equines on the hay fields, but weed control still became a major problem. The equines would eat the weeds, and when the composted manure was spread on the fields, it would reseed the weeds. Adequately composted manure worked fine in smaller areas. However, on these very large tracts of land, the weeds still became numerous. Star and Russian thistle were weeds they used to have to physically dig out of the fields with a shovel. Before present day, nothing seemed to kill it or reduce the spread, except by eliminating it with a shovel year after year. Each year there was less to dig out.
If your neighbors don't take care of their weeds, you can always expect to have some overspread into your fields, so just plan ahead. The newly developed weed killers are a real help.
When we have them come out and apply the fertilizer and the weed killer, we keep everybody off the fields. That's stuff that you don't want to get on your clothes or anything. You don't want to, because you can accidentally ingest it. So the people, the company that comes out and applies it, they stay in their equipment, and when it's all getting applied, and they wear special rubber boots or something like that to keep it from getting on their body or their clothes. We have no weeds on our field, but if we didn't do a yearly weed spray, or we do sometimes twice a year depending on the season, the weeds on the neighbors' fields that they don't take care of that issue, it'll migrate into ours. The wind will blow the seeds. That's how the seeds are designed to spread that way, and the birds flying overhead can drop them also. So it's a annual battle to get rid of the weeds. Some of the more difficult weeds to get rid of on the ranch was the Russian thistle and yellow star thistle. They're pretty tolerant to a lot of the weed sprays we use on there. So what we had to do is go out with a shovel and actually dig them up to remove the roots. Otherwise they just come right back. Here in the last couple of years, they've come out with a weed killer that is safe for our grass that will eradicate those types of weeds, so we no longer have to go out and dig them up with a shovel.
The Lucky 3 Ranch heavily researched the applications of a variety of weed killers and fertilizer chemicals. They opted to use only those chemicals that were determined to be absolutely safe for livestock consumption after being absorbed for the allotted periods of time. Even though they did not turn out the equines on the hayfields, the equines could still grab grass under the fence. After each application of weed killer and fertilizer, the animals had to be kept away from the sprayed areas for a finite amount of time, so the chemicals would dissipate and become biodegraded. This usually took about a week.
These chemicals we put on there aren't safe for animals to consume, so we have to keep our animals away from those areas we tend to stay away for 2 weeks, let everything get watered in and where it dissipates, where if they do consume any of the grass, it's not going to harm them.
And at the Lucky 3 Ranch, we keep our animals off the hay fields, and so we can keep them pristine. And so the animals have their own turnout areas, and we're standing in one turnout area right now. We'll cut this area on the first cutting, and then after we've done that and we picked it up and baled it and stacked it, then we will use this area as a turnout. There will be no second cutting coming off of this at all.
We like to keep the manure picked up off the field so it doesn't make it into the hay bale. If they eat weeds or something like that, then they ain't spreading the weeds out here in the hay field.
These animals are grazing on an all-grass Broman Orchard grass field. We killed off the alfalfa years ago because I determined it was very unhealthy for them. We were getting diarrhea in the manure and all kinds of problems, and since we've done that, their manure is just right consistency and nobody's getting colic. We see our veterinarian probably twice a year, once in the spring for the vaccinations and then again in the fall. And we do vet checks on the new rescues that we bring in here.
Once we ceased using the composted manure, the fields became weed-free and qualified for state certification.
Tending the hayfields was an ongoing learning experience in the Lucky 3 Ranch's quest for the perfect hay crop, and their efforts have been amply rewarded. The hay they produce shows its results in the animals they raise that have reached maximum health and longevity. But before spring, there's still a lot to do to prepare for tending the crop. The wheel line irrigation system posed a number of issues and undue cost. In December 2008, the Lucky 3 Ranch began work on a new traveling gun irrigation system to improve hayfield irrigation efficiency. The small holding pit that was used to catch the ditch water to feed the wheel line system would not be adequate for this new traveling gun system. They had to construct a much larger pond and pump house to push the water through the 8-inch PVC pipe system. It snowed a lot through the winter, so digging the pond went slowly.
The wheel line that they had out here was 1,800 feet long. So in the middle of the 1,800 feet, you had a tractor, you had a motor running the wheel line. And then with the weight of the wheel line being that long, when it was rolling across the field, the ends of the wheel line would get left behind. Every time you had to come to reset it, you had to pull the wheel lines back in line.
The subcontractors trenched 1,300 feet from the pump house to the middle of the hayfield to meet at a T, where 1,300 feet of trench went north and 1,300 feet of trench went south. The 8-inch PVC feeder pipe was laid in the trenches, and the reel of the traveling gun had a hose on it that would plug into the pods to receive the water. The water was then fed through the hose that was pumped through to the sprinkler head. Meredith was concerned that they did not line the trench with gravel, knowing how much the adobe soil shifts in this area. They guaranteed it for 2 years, so she conceded, still knowing there would be trouble ahead. There were 10 pods in the PVC cross pipes where the reel would be plugged in to receive the water that would go through the system. The sprinkler was pulled out about 1,500 feet from the reel, and the reel speed was adjusted for water coverage. This system would be much better for complete coverage of the hayfields, if it worked properly.
When we installed the traveling gun system initially, we had to dig about 3,900 feet of trench to lay our pipe in, and that supplies pods that we hook up our traveling gun to. When that was all being dug in, the type of soil we have out here tends to shift a lot, and you want to bed your pipe in gravel so that the gravel will shift around while when the ground shifts instead of the pipe moving.
At this point, the flood irrigation ditches were buried, all except the perimeter ditches that would catch the neighbor's runoff and carry any excess water to the ditches along the road. In some places, culverts were put in to carry the water across the property to the neighbor's land. They had water shares and a flood irrigation system that needed access through the Lucky 3 Ranch property. When this was done, a culvert was also put in along the county road access from the head gate along the road for about a quarter mile to the Lucky 3 Ranch property. Access pods were put in along the culvert for the neighbors who had shares of the ditch water. This would eliminate ditch cleaning all season, prevent water evaporation in the ditches, and prevent people without water shares from stealing the water from the open ditch. It's a much more efficient use of the allotted water shares. Generally speaking, in January, it's important to make the call to competent mechanics and have your equipment serviced. Remember that your tractors, balers, stacker, wagon, swather, and other farm implements have been sitting dormant all winter. Just because they were working during your last cutting doesn't mean they will all be ready to go in the late spring or early summer. There can be dried seals, broken pins, and even rust corroding unseen places on your machinery. They need oil changes based off their running hours and annual checkups.
A lot of the challenges we face here during hay season are mainly weather and not having enough time to get the hay up in the barn from the time we cut it, because once it's cut, we don't want it to get rained on or anything like that, or have a big windstorm to come blow it all away and lose our crop. So we pay a lot of attention to the weather and finding a big enough window to get everything done on 100 plus acres of hayfield is kind of a challenge sometimes. Another challenge we face from time to time are mechanical failures. So one year we had a baler break down on us and we weren't able to get it fixed right away because hay season here is everyone's hay season. So a lot of mechanics and technicians are out busy fixing other people's stuff and can't always get to us. So one year we did have to go out and buy another baler just to get our hay in before it got destroyed. So those are some challenges.
Never put off until tomorrow what you can do today. And if you have to buy more equipment, buy it new if you can possibly swing it, even if it makes, even if you have to get a loan to get it. Because if you don't get new things and you try getting old, used equipment or whatever, you're going to spend a lot of time doing maintenance to clean up the problems that other people sold the equipment for.
And if you buy new equipment, then you get the dealer support and warranties with them also.
We ran into problems with old tractors that have caught on fire because of faulty wiring. The engine blocks are wore out and they don't make the power, so you're burning more diesel fuel, consuming more fuel unnecessarily than you have to. So there's a lot of advantages to purchasing the new equipment. Even though it may be more expensive, it saves you money in the long run over the maintenance costs that you will be facing. A good way to get grass to quit growing is put hydraulic fluid or diesel fuel on it. Mother Nature does not like petroleum products on plants at all.
And by cleaning up our equipment before we put it away, we can tell when there's a leak a lot more easily because everything's clean. Then we can get the problem fixed right away. And so then we don't run into it later when we need it.
It's better to keep your equipment inside if you got the room for it. If you store it outside, you can always cover it with a tarp too.
Yeah, being proactive with your maintenance and care on your equipment now saves you a lot of headaches in the future.
In January and February, it's important that our hayfields get plenty of moisture in the form of snow. The more they get, the more moisture there is soaking slowly into the ground that'll help the grass grow in the spring. Spring rains alone are not usually enough moisture to get a good stand of hay. In February, if it's not all done, one should continue servicing the equipment. All the farm implements should be readied for the season. All the irrigation equipment should also be checked and readied. Any equipment or system elements should always be fixed when failures occur, so there's no problem with old issues going forward. It helps to be proactive so you can jump right on any issues that may arise during the season. Then it's just a matter of paying attention to Mother Nature, watching the weather reports and waiting for moisture. Hopefully there will be a bit of snow or rain to begin to moisturize the fields naturally. But if there is a dry season, it'll be important to have the irrigation system ready to go by April 1st. It generally takes 3 to 4 weeks to irrigate all of the Lucky 3 Ranch hayfields.
Come February, we start preparing for the season. We make sure that our equipment has been serviced if it hasn't been called for and serviced at that time. There's typically a ditch meeting where we get the status on what the ditch company's going through, so we can kind of prepare on our end if they're seeing a shortage of water or anything like that. And then we start scheduling things to be done as far as what we can, as far as like fertilizer. We try to get it down around that time so that we can get it in the ground, let the snow water it in, and get it into the soil real good before the grass starts shooting up around the middle of March.
March brings the first shoots of spring grass breaking through the surface of the ground. This means the ground is soft enough to take soil samples and see what kind of fertilizer the fields will need. One should then call for fertilizer based on multiple soil samples taken from each of the hayfield sections. Nitrogen is one chemical that always seems to be needed.
We take several soil samples because the dirt can be different from one field to another.
So when we take a soil sample, it helps determine what we use. The lab will break it down, look at what the composition is, and based off of what crop you're growing, it needs different nutrients. So they will make recommendations off of what they see is in our soil, and then they'll call it in and say you need so much nitrogen or so much phosphorus or anything like that, and that's what we apply down on our fields.
In April, it's time to call for Menifee Humate. These are the organic substances that coagulate when the strong base extract is acidified, while fulvic acids are the organic substances that remain soluble when the strong base extract is acidified. Menifee Humate increases the water infiltration and water holding capacity of the soil. They greatly improve the soil, increase plant root growth and metabolism, enhance seed germination, and help plants deal with environmental stresses. They remove odors and slurry and compost piles and keep irrigation lines clean. If there has not been a lot of moisture over the winter, irrigation will begin as soon as the ditch rider opens the ditches.
In Colorado, we usually do get plenty of moisture in the winter and spring, so we can usually forego irrigation until after the first cutting.
The water comes from the snow melt, and it comes from the Southside Ditch Company, and they have a reservoir someplace around here, and it comes down the canals to us, and then it comes down County Road or Wild Bird Lane in a pipe, and we store some of it in our pond out here.
We've had more moisture this year than they've said in the last 30 years.
We've had 7.9 inches of rain, and that's the most rain we've had since 1940.
It is also important in April, when things begin to grow, that one sprays for weeds along the fence lines. If the fence lines are not kept clean, they could spread weed seeds into the fields. The Lucky 3 Ranch now has a traveling gun sprinkler system that is very efficient and covers every square inch of each of the hay fields when there's a need to irrigate in the spring. The water supply comes down a main feeder ditch from the Big Thompson River and empties into the irrigation pond. At the pond, there is a pump house that'll pump the water from the pond through a feeder pipe that runs west to east. This pipe tees with a cross pipe that runs north and south the full length of the property and through all the hay fields. This line has pods where the traveling gun reel hose is attached to irrigate a measured distance of each hay field. It'll be set at a designated pod, and the sprinkler gun will be dragged out to the length it needs to cover each particular section of that field. There are valves at the tee and a switch at the pump house to turn the water off and on each time the reel is reset.
Well, there's an 8-inch steel pipe buried in the ground which comes up the pods out in the field. That's where we hook the traveling gun to. And then the traveling gun has a 1,200-foot hose on it, that's 6-inch. It pushes the pressure up going to a smaller hose. And then you pull that out to the fence, and then you have gears on the thing so you can adjust it to how many inches of water you can put on it at a time. So the slower you go, you can water the fields up to 6 inches. Put 6 inches of water on the field like it rains 6 inches. The traveling gun is just like reeling up a hose on the field.
When setting up the traveling gun sprinkler, it is first hooked up to the tractor and dragged into the hayfield to the first irrigation setting. The gauges are set for speed and coverage, and the sprinkler can then begin its first irrigation swath. When the traveling gun has reeled in the hose completely, it is then pivoted into the opposite direction. The sprinkler head is dragged all the way out again to cover the field in the opposite direction. When that hayfield setting is covered, it is detached from that pod. Then it is moved to the next pod and set up for irrigation of the next swath the same way. This continues until all of the fields have been sufficiently irrigated. May is the time to reassess for moisture content in the hayfields. Whether or not to irrigate will depend upon the amount of snow and rainfall and the depth of moisture in the hayfields.
We get pretty lucky with Mother Nature in the springtime. It tends to snow and rain quite a bit, so we typically don't have to use our water shares in the springtime. We try to mitigate our water loss. The two big ways we've done it is from our head gate, which is where they start measuring our water that we use. We have piped in our ditches so that we have no water loss to evaporation or to the ditches. And then we have it dump into a pond where before we didn't have a liner in it that held very tight. We'd lose a lot of water to the ground. It would seep through, and naturally evaporation set in an open pond. So this last spring or this last fall, we had a plastic liner installed that will stop our water loss to the ground.
Well, the fields are looking pretty good today, this season.
Yeah.
I'd say. Boy, it was pretty worrisome there for a while. Looked like we're going into a drought, but that last rainstorm brought everything up really good. Nothing looks like it's really stunted.
So I think need to let it grow for a couple more weeks and maybe do another round of irrigation on it.
Yeah, we still got a little moisture in there, but we could definitely use some more in there to get the grass growing more. So And then maybe at the end of this season, come in and really harrow the fields out good. We're starting to get some thatch buildup in here. And, yep. So we'll hit it. Obviously we'll aerate it a couple times throughout the year, like we always do, but maybe do a heavier harrowing on it, get rid of some of that thatch that's under there. And we got some decent moisture in there right now, but we can definitely get some more in here in the next irrigation.
Yeah, the grass feels good. Got a lot of moisture in it.
Yep.
So
Yeah, it's doing good.
So do you think you got to get more irrigation on it before we cut?
Yeah, we like to see this grass at least 2-3 times higher than this when we try to cut it. So,
yep.
So this will make a miserable baler if we're only cutting it this high. So, but yeah, I think dethatching it this next fall will help out a lot for next year's growth.
I agree. The fields do look good.
Yeah.
Well, you know, when we're doing this, we have to check several places in the field because even though it looks like a big green carpet, it can be quite different from one spot to another. And so when we're looking at the field and assessing how to irrigate and everything, we do have to check it. So what do you guys think about this spot?
Now this spot here, it's a little bit thinner, it's not as tall. I think what's going on here is we could have a little bit different soil type going on here. It's also probably right on the edge of where the sprinkler hits, so it doesn't get as much water as the rest of the field does. So we might have to address nozzles or pressure to get a little bit more coverage over here for water.
And it has to do with the wind too.
Yeah.
Because we've had really windy days when we're trying to irrigate. And sometimes the wind will blow the water off where the sprinkler's trying to put it.
Yeah, and the thatch isn't as bad here because obviously the grass hasn't been growing as high.
Yep.
So.
But it is pretty dusty, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just dry.
Yeah, yep.
So.
And I think it has a lot to do with the wind.
Yep. Not enough water. Too much wind and not enough rain. But also the area too where we had a lot of that mold issue when the grass all laid up.
Well, looks like it's another soil sample time.
See if there's any spiders in here. Nope. Oh, they like to hide in here.
What kind of spiders hide in there?
Wolf spiders.
Oh, the big ones.
Yeah. Yeah, the ground's shrinking up on us because we have the lack of moisture. We haven't gotten any rain really enough to fight this, and we haven't had a chance to get irrigation on it because we're hitting the other parts of the field.
These are some big cracks in the ground here, and the grass is all clumped up everywhere with nothing in between.
Yeah, the clumping on the grass, that's the brome grass growing in. For some reason the orchard's not growing in here because the orchard grows as more of a blanket type grass than the brome does. And the cracks, we haven't had a chance to irrigate this, and we haven't really had enough water rain-wise this spring. So the soil's shrinking up and getting the cracks.
Not enough moisture in it yet. We haven't irrigated here yet.
Before the fertilized grass gets too tall, it's time to call for weed killer to be applied. Spraying for broadleaf weeds is advisable because they do crop up every year. There are also other weed killers that'll cover those weeds that are not covered by the broadleaf sprays. Alfalfa is a broadleafed plant and will therefore be able to be eliminated from the grass hayfields with these weed sprays. Everything used at the Lucky 3 Ranch is animal safe after a certain number of days following the application.
Typically, we leave it undisturbed and keep the animals away for a week.
We usually have a wet June in Colorado, so we need to wait for a window of opportunity that is dry for at least 10 days to be able to harvest the first cutting.
June typically is kind of sporadic with rain. The grass is starting to come into the seeding phase of the grass growth cycle. So we try to dart around the weather there. July tends to be really hot and dry here. We do get the sporadic rainstorm there. It's typically an afternoon thunderstorm, but we're just dodging the weather.
Sometimes Mother Nature can fool you. You think you have a window of opportunity, but as it turns out, a rainstorm will come out of nowhere and rain on your newly cut hay if you seize that first opportunity.
At the Lucky 3 Ranch, rule of thumb is to let that first window go by and wait for the second window of opportunity instead. The first window is predictably shorter than the weather reports say, and if you can cut then, it will inevitably rain on your new windrows. This usually happens in late June or even into July. The ideal time to harvest is right before the grass begins to seed, but if it rains or the ground isn't dry, it will hinder the ability to cut the hay.
So the first cutting of hay takes place, usually the earliest we've ever done it was about the 4th week of June. Typically it happens in the first or second week of July, but it's all dependent on the weather. If we have a dry spring and we can get it up sooner and the grass is ready, we'll jump on it and do it then. The grass will tell you when it's ready. It'll start coming to a seed. We try to get it before the seeds mature, because then the grass will get tougher. I don't think it's as tasty for the animals to eat actually at that point. So we try to get it done before that. If weather pushes us off, then we just gotta wait for nature to give us our window. I've tasted the grass out there before, just curious, going out there, pick out a piece and throw it in your mouth, chew on it, and it tastes kind of like you think it would taste like. Kid, you probably tasted grass before, and it's pretty similar.
At the Lucky 3 Ranch, any hay that is left from the previous year in the hay barn nearest the ranch needs to be moved to the second hay barn at the 17-acre field to make room for the new hay. The older hay will be sold when the new crop comes in. Lucky 3 Ranch keeps enough hay on hand to feed the equines for 2 years, provides hay at a discount for the equines at Hearts and Horses Therapeutic Riding Center, and will sell the rest. They keep enough for the Lucky 3 equines for 2 years in case there's a crop loss in the following year.
We store enough hay here to get us through 2 years, and the rest of it we sell, and a lot of it goes to Hearts and Horses Therapeutic Riding Stables.
So we store everything we take off the field initially. We hold back enough for us to feed this year, the year that we had just cut for, plus one additional year just in case our crop fails on us the next year. And that's what we store for ourselves. Everything else we will sell. We sell to Hearts and Horses Therapeutic Riding Stable for a discounted price. That's one of the organizations we support. We believe in their program and their mission, so we support them in everything that we can here. So we have 2 hay barns here. We'll transfer whatever we have left over that we're not going to feed to our animals or that hasn't been sold over there, and that's what Hearts and Horses will take throughout the year.
In 2015, there was an incident of loss when it rained so much for so long that the grass grew very tall and mold settled into the base of the field. It had to be cut and removed from the field.
Basically, the grass got so tall it folded over on itself and wouldn't let the ground dry out, so it started molding from the bottom, from the ground up.
In 2015, we had a lot of rain. The rain pushed us off of cutting hay for a long time, and our hay got so tall that it actually would fall over on itself. And when it happened, it's kind of like creating a windrow of itself that it would lock in the water at the base of the stem, and it actually started causing the grass to rot on the field. So we had to actually get that cut and pulled off of there. We actually brought in another crew with a bigger swath or a bigger baler, and they baled that up in 3x3 big cowbells, and that was all cow hay. Most of it looked like tiger stripes when they were baling it, because it'd be black then green, then black then green.
The affected fields were allowed to dry out, then chemically treated and irrigated.
Once we got that all pulled off the field, we got a hold of our company that does our fertilizing and weed kill, and we had let them know what happened and what was going on there, and they had a product that they could put down that would kill off all the mold that was growing on the field.
Luckily, the Lucky 3 Ranch was able to get a sparse second cutting in September. They had sufficient hay with what was held over from the previous year to feed their equines throughout another year.
Mother Nature can be tricky at best. She sure keeps you on your toes.
Ordinarily, without raking, Lucky 3 Ranch allows 3 weeks for 112 acres to get cut, baled, and stacked. However, recently they've been allowed shorter windows of opportunity with each season. They have been able to put up the hay quicker with their new equipment. Lucky 3 Ranch now only needs 10 days to cut, tedder, then rake and bale the hay with 2 balers instead of just 1. They usually split the hay fields and only do half of them in a 10-day period. If it stays dry longer, they can do all the fields at once.
So the swather is a big piece of machinery, and the front part of it is called the head, and that's what cuts the grass, and that's about 16 feet wide. As it makes its path, that 16-foot area of grass gets cut, and behind the swather, or below it, it turns out a very small portion of all that grass that was cut into a more narrow pile, and that is what's called the windrow. And that's the part that the animal's gonna eat, and that's what we rake, and that's what we bale up to put in the hay. When we have 2 tractors out in the field at the same time baling, we don't really coordinate. We just kind of pay attention to, like, I'll just check which windrow he's in and avoid that one, and I'll give him enough space to turn around. We go anywhere from 5 to 6 rows to make our loops and our circles, so wherever I see him at, I'll count 5 or 6 rows out and start my own pattern, and so that way we're avoiding each other, not running into each other, and we're also not getting each other in a jam by getting too close. So that's basically all we do.
While the balers are in operation, a third person picks up and stacks the hay in the covered barns with a stacker wagon.
It's a blast. I mean, you're sitting 4 foot in front of the front tires. You're basically out in space, just floating along the fields, picking up bales, hoping you're keeping up with the bales coming up so you don't have to get out and restack your load.
It's important to put up the bales with no more than a 14% moisture rating. Any higher moisture content can result in mold and heat inside the bales and can conceivably cause a fire later. It is also tricky because you don't want to put it up too dry either. The bales can simply disintegrate and fall apart.
After the swather goes through and puts it in a windrow, then the tedderer comes behind it and spreads the grass out thin on the field. It'll dry basically the next day, and then we have to go back and rake it in the windrows, and we can start baling.
Here we have gates everywhere to every field, and sometimes the baler is offset from the tractor a little bit, so you have to kind of finagle your way around to get through gates, and it can be pretty challenging. And every once in a while I'll hit a post or nick a gate, and then I have to call Steve to come fix it. But luckily Meredith doesn't get mad. She's very forgiving. You have to go really slow so you don't plug up your baler, which I've done before. Chad had to come to my rescue. Yeah, you just go very slow, and it depends on the size of the windrows. So your speed will vary depending on how much hay is in your windrow. And you just really slow, and it's a really bumpy ride, and then it just spits the bales out the other end. When we first start baling, we have these PVC sticks that Chad cut to size of the standard size of a bale. And the first few bales that we actually bale, we always get out and check each one to make sure it's the proper size and there's no curves in them, because if there's curving going on, we need to adjust the tension. And we also like to make sure the strings are a certain tightness, because if they're too loose, they don't stack well in the haystack in the barn, and it could fall down and be a very dangerous situation going and getting hay. And if they're too tight, then it's more easy for them to break if they're too tight. And so we like a perfect tension and tightness on the bales. So our first few we check quite often, and then by the time everything's pretty warmed up, then we can just cruise right along and keep going. From time to time there are elk, mostly in the winter time is when they come in, and they'll just be hanging out in the hayfield eating our grass. So it's pretty cool to watch and get pretty close to them, so it's pretty awesome.
Once the hay is finally stored in the hay barn, it's time to go back through the fields, bale the excess hay lying around, and pick up any extra bales that were left in the field. Sometimes the baler fails, strings break, and this leaves extra hay in the field. If it's enough, one can pull the strings, rake the hay into windrows, and rebale. If the hay left in the field is weedy, wet, or unsuitable for consumption, it is raked up and thrown away. Bales that come from a weedy part of the field are kept separated from the good hay and are sold cheaper as cow hay.
Emptying the stack wagon in the hay barn, you have to back up straight to the bale to the stack behind you, and then you have to get out and look to see where you are, and then get back in and start dumping it. And then after you get it dumped, you have poles to put up against it, so when you pull off of it, the stacks don't fall over.
We call this sweeping the fields.
Sweeping the field is when we're done baling everything on the field. We'll have areas in the corners that when we make the turn, the windrow might have been wider than what the baler was able to pick up at the time, or sometimes our windrows are wider than what the baler will pick up in the middle of the field. We can't leave that sit on there because it'll rot and cause problems with the grass underneath it. So we will go back out with the balers and run around and pick up those isolated areas that we had missed, and that's what we call sweeping the field. Sometimes we have broken bales. When it comes to the baler, they'll hit the ground and they just break. So we have to go back and pick those up. Again, we can't leave those on the field. If we have a lot of broken bales in a row, we'll go out there and we'll pull the strings out and we will put them back rake them back into a windrow and then rebale them that way.
When the field sweeping is completed, all the equipment is lined up in the field for cleaning with the blower. The blower makes cleaning the equipment pretty easy, but that's not all. Everyone has to use the blower on each other to get all that itchy hay out of their clothes. When everything has been blown clean, the equipment is returned to the equipment barn where all the mechanical things on each piece of machinery is checked and readied for the second cutting.
So after our second cutting, we'll go out and we'll aerate the fields, we'll harrow the fields. That helps break up the ground so that it's not getting compacted, because the grass still needs the ground to be somewhat soft for the roots to spread and be healthy. We'll pressure wash all the equipment, and what that helps us do is if we have something leaking, we'll see it over the winter when it leaks, so we can get that issue fixed before we get into the next hay season.
At the end of every hay season, well, at the end of every cutting, really, the tractors and balers and everything get covered in dust and hay and all sorts of stuff, and we like to clean things up before we put them away, before we use them next time, because that just makes equipment and everything last longer. So what we do between each cutting is take leaf blowers and blow off all of the equipment top to bottom and just clean it out completely so nothing gets stuck or jammed up anywhere, and it'll function properly like it should the next time we go to use it. And then we blow off each other, because that's a pretty messy task, and hay dust is pretty itchy, so we blow each other off so we can get as clean as we can so we're not itchy all the rest of the day. And then at the end of our hay season, we usually wash the tractors off really good and the equipment, so it's nice and clean, and there's just, no leftover grease residue anywhere to cause any issues. So we just hose everything off before winter and park it so it's all clean and ready to go. What we do at the Lucky 3 Ranch is we store all of our equipment indoors so it's out of the weather, and it keeps the equipment nice and clean and no damage is caused to it by keeping it inside, and so it makes all of our stuff last longer.
When the fields are completely clean again, it's time to call for fertilizer if needed, and then start irrigation. Soil tests are usually not needed for the second cutting, and the fertilizer applied will only be nitrogen to help the grass grow faster. It will take 3 to 4 weeks to completely irrigate all of the hay fields. It's important not to let the field sit too long after cutting, baling, and stacking before beginning to irrigate. This will give the hay its best chance to grow as much as possible. If it does not get irrigated right away and gets too dried out, it will stunt the growth of the grass. Because it takes so long to irrigate, the fields are cut, baled, and stacked in sections. If it needs to be irrigated immediately, irrigation can begin while the crew is still cutting and baling other sections. That way, they can make sure the grass gets irrigated quickly after being cut. Lucky 3 Ranch will cut the 12 acres, 58 acres, and jump course, 2.5 acres, during the first dry window. Then cut the 25-acre and 17-acre sections during the next dry window. They use this same protocol for every cutting window opportunity that arises, so nothing will get too dried out and cease to grow to its maximum capacity. So they can be irrigating the first window cutting while cutting during the second window of opportunity. If a harvesting window has not happened in June, the crew will just wait for the window of opportunity to harvest the first cutting in July. If there is not ample rain and the fields don't dry out enough to be cut, the crew will continue with irrigation until all the fields are sufficiently covered and then shut down the irrigation. It's not unusual for first cutting to be in the first or second week of July.
When the window of opportunity does open up, we know we're in really good shape because we've done all this preventive maintenance on the equipment.
Every once in a while we might have a small glitch here and there, like a dead battery, but it's always something that we can get right on and fix very promptly.
And after that, we'll head out to the field with a swather, get everything cut, tedded, and raked.
We pull the tractors and balers out of the equipment barn after the swather is cut, and we're done tethering and raking and head to the fields.
With all the new equipment, the Lucky 3 crew is able to cut the hay and then use the tedder to spread the hay over the fields to dry.
Oh, running the tractor is pretty fun, and it's basically just like driving a car, so you just sit a lot higher, so it's not real hard, it's pretty easy. But it's nice to get a little change of scenery. I usually spend most of my time working in the office, so during hay season when I get to go outside and be in the tractor, it's a lot of fun and a nice break. Even though it is a bouncy ride, it's pretty fun and nice.
Some of the other issues we run into with the hay season is, again, if we have dry weather when we're baling, if the hay gets too dry, it tends to lead to a lot of broken bales, so those are issues we have to try to deal with. And then one that we encountered a couple years ago is we like to buy everything in bulk so that we have enough on supply, we never run short. And we had an issue a couple years ago where we had to go buy new twine because our twine was actually getting old, and every bale we put through there was breaking because the twine had just dried up and gotten old.
We generally cut and tedder half the fields at a time to make sure that we can get it all cut and baled and put in storage in between rainstorms. We'll cut the 58 acres, the 12 acres, and the 2.5 acre jump course.
That's when we will begin tethering, raking, baling, and stacking.
If the weather looks like it'll hold for more than 10 days, we will go ahead and irrigate what we had just finished. We will then resume cutting, tethering, raking, baling, and stacking the 2 remaining parcels, 25 acres and 17 acres.
If it looks like it'll rain soon after we get done with the first 3 parcels, then we will look for another window of opportunity to cut the other 2 parcels. Otherwise, we will start irrigating the first 3 parcels that we cut.
While the hay is drying, the tractor is hooked up to the rake. This is a complicated process and is not to be taken lightly. There's a lot of tension on the parts, and you want the hydraulics to work properly. So all the connecting parts need to be carefully attached. Sometimes the tines on the rake will get broken and will need to be replaced. This should also be done in advance of going into the field to rake the hay that was spread by the tedder into windrows again for baling. It's important that the parts match in length so the rake works properly. The bolts that are holding the tines in place need to be torqued down tightly. You don't want the tines to go flying off while you're raking, as that could be dangerous to anyone in its path.
It's important when you take your equipment out to check all your nuts and bolts, make sure everything's tight. The vibration that the machines produce will actually surprise you how many bolts they'll loosen up during your time out there. So it's a good idea to go check it or give everything a good tightening down, because you don't want to lose these out in the field. They'll end up in a hay bale, go through the baler, it could break equipment or break parts in the hay baler, go through tires. Just a lot of bad news if that happens. Yeah, when we go through there, we'll tighten everything down, but we'll have another person come through afterwards and just double check to make sure we didn't miss a bolt, and then everybody's verifying that everything's been tightened down.
This is a grease gun, and we have to grease all the moving parts on the machine, and there's grease zerks at each moving part, and it just makes the machine run a lot smoother, and then no breaking parts. It's battery powered, and there's a sleeve of grease inside here, and when you pull the trigger, it goes down the tube and it goes inside the grease zerk into the machine. And it's always a good idea if you got a dirty zerk, go ahead and clean it off so you ain't pushing the dirt inside, and go back and wipe off your excess grease so it don't end up out in the field too. It's that petroleum product thing.
We don't always have to replace tines because the tines usually last us a few years before they get really worn down. It's not very often that we replace them. Sometimes if you hit a rock or any unlevel ground in the field, one will break, so then we do have to replace it. So usually I'll come around and I'll replace the tines and get the whole thing together, and then they'll come along and make sure everything's real nice and tight, because they're a lot stronger than I am. And they'll tighten it all up, and then they always make sure I get my hydraulic hoses hooked nice and secure so they don't pop off and spring open and leak hydraulic fluid everywhere. So they always just kind of help me out and be my strong arms. So
We always do everything twice because we like it nice.
And part of your check on your equipment is to check the air pressure in your tires, make sure your tires are filled up. You run them low, you will pop a tire out there in those fields, and then it's dragging that piece of equipment in the ground instead of rolling, and you're going to drag a big rut in your field. Once you've gone through and done all your checks and everything, the last check you do is make sure that the rake will actually spin freely. And what that does is it allows you to listen for any kind of grinding noise coming out of the gearbox, because if that happens, you know you got a problem. You don't want to take it out in the field because you probably do some serious damage at that point. And that'll be your last check to make sure everything's good to go.
Once the hay is back into windrows, they can then bale the new windrows with their 2 balers very quickly. As the 2 tractors are baling, they have a third person running the stacker and putting it into barn storage. They often use one more person in the gator ahead of the stacker to make sure the bales are turned properly to feed into the stacker the right way. This makes for maximum efficiency and an optimum brome and orchard grass hay crop that is always weed-free.
We help them if there's anything they need done at any time or need some part, something, we go and get it.
Yeah, we get to drive the gator all over.
during hay season, it's a lot different than our usual time here at the ranch. We all work together and we spend a lot of time together during hay season, and most of the time we're kind of doing our own stuff. So we all get to be together when it's hay season and all work together and hang out, and it's a lot of fun.
After the first cutting, irrigation is resumed for optimum growth. This process continues into August until the hay fields are again sufficiently covered. Then time is allowed for ample growth and for the fields to dry again. When the weather and fields are optimum for the second cutting, they will again be cut in sections between the wet periods.
Transition to the second cutting, after we get done with the first cutting, we start irrigation, and then through the hotter months, and then let it grow up, dry out again, and cool off, and go at it again.
Age-appropriate kids can ride along and learn the art of cutting, baling, and stacking under strict supervision. They can be quite a bit of help during the harvest season.
During hay season, I have a lot of fun. I started riding with my dad when I was really little.
Eventually, kids can become really helpful by driving the truck or gator and flipping bales in front of the stack wagon.
My job during hay season is to go around and flip bales on the gator.
Kids can learn to operate the skid steer for around-the-farm jobs like cleaning pins and hauling trash.
My favorite thing to do around the ranch is drive the skid steer.
Later, they can learn to cut cow hay with a tractor and brush hog, working their way up to driving the heavy equipment.
Equipment that I've driven is the swather, skid steer, ranch truck, the tractors, the backhoe, and the gator. I like spending time with my dad and my grandpa. My grandpa was driving down the road and he did a wheelie with a skid steer.
Kids that do not get this opportunity to learn this will be at greater risk to environmental hazards. Got it.
Sometimes in August, the grass will not grow well on the 17 acres, so they have to add more Menifee humate. It increases the water infiltration and water holding capacity of the soil.
Menifee humate, or it's called humic acid when they apply it. It's an organic compound that we put in our soils here. We have a lot of clay type soil in our area. There's not a lot of organics in that, so the organics help the grass grow. They root deeper, so that's a healthier grass stand. Another benefit of the the humic acid is it helps the ground absorb water or hold on to it longer. And that's part of the organics in there. The organic will lock onto that water and keep it in there longer. We transition into the second cutting. When we get done with our first cut, we will put down nitrogen if we have the weather or the time with getting the water on the fields. At that point, the grass has been opened up. We need to get water on it right away so it doesn't cause over drying of the field. It'll cause the grass to go into kind of a shock kind of state. So we try to schedule that if we can. If it's just not going to work out with scheduling, we go right to putting water on it, and we get as much water on the fields as fast as we can.
In Colorado, we can get a lot of spotty rainstorms and sometimes even flooding. If there is no window of opportunity in August, we may have to wait until September or even early October for the second cutting.
Second cutting takes place, again, the grass will tell us when it's ready to go. It tends to happen, I want to say like third, fourth week of August. It seems like that's what it comes out to me. Sometimes we even get into September. We try to get a couple irrigation cycles on the fields and let it grow from that point.
When you're dealing with heavy equipment and Mother Nature, even the best laid plans can go awry. The swather can have mechanical or computer problems, and the AC can go out and leave you sweltering in the hot cab. Tractors have problems with computerized instruments, flat tires, faulty hydraulics, and a plethora of other issues. The balers can overheat or lose the right tension on the baling twine, just to name a couple of problems. The stacker can get out of alignment and can also have computer issues, as well as get stuck if there's a soft spot in the field.
Another issue we have is if the ground's too wet when we go out with our equipment. This last year we had our leaky pond issue, and it leaked over to where we had a muddy spot in one of our fields, and when we come through with stack wagon, it actually got stuck in the field. We had to use another tractor to pull it out of that spot to carry on with our job.
Oh, I was coming down the north side of the 25 down there by the pond, and the pond leaks, and it was soaked out there, and as soon as I got into the mud, I just sank, and no traction tires, so.
Yeah, and he gave me a call and said, I'm stuck, so.
Yep.
Left the baler hooked on there and ran over there, grabbed a tow strap, and backed out and pulled him out. Luckily, he wasn't stuck that bad, so.
Yep. Just spinning. After the second cutting, we go through and aerate, harrow the fields, and the equipment we clean up and park in the hay barn or park in the machine shop.
The weathermen are mostly right, and you can generally make plans around their weather report, but they don't always get it right. One needs to use their eyes, ears, and sense of smell to get in line with Mother Nature. And sometimes that isn't even good enough. With good sense and a little luck, you can get all your hay in, but sometimes the weather comes out of nowhere. This time we had mechanical issues, but luckily we had 5,000 bales in the barn and only lost about 60 bales to the rain. Farming is both a science and an art. It takes a lot of common sense to be successful.
The most common thing that we have to deal with our equipment is mechanical failures. The most common one is broken shear bolts in the balers. If you get too much hay pulled into the baler at one time, it'll break a shear bolt, and it's designed to break so that you don't break something bigger on the equipment. We've had a couple feed arms break on them before, and then that's a matter of hoping that the local dealership has that part in stock so that we can get it put back on our baler or whatever we're working on at the time. Some of those repairs we can do ourselves. The shear bolts was something that we do in the field. The feed arms, that required partial disassemble of the machine, so we actually call our dealership, which we use Wagner equipment here, and they'd come out and take care of that in field for us.
Mother Nature is not the only snag you could hit during the hay season. Lucky 3 Ranch put in a traveling gun system that they believed would be a better way to make sure that every square inch of the hayfields would be irrigated. And it did work that way. However, when they put in the system, Meredith had her doubts about the quality and the way they buried the 8-inch PVC pipe that carried the water to the traveling gun. She did not think the PVC pipe would last very long. The first installers did not line the ditch with gravel to stabilize the pipe and protect it from the ground shifting over the years. This did result in blowing pods after the system had been in for about 3 years and continued over 10 years.
We had to replace 8 pods over the years, including the junction where the feeder pipe met the distribution pipe.
It was critically important that the initial installation of our traveling gun irrigation system was done correctly. The feeder pipe at the pump house was properly installed with a good cement base around the pipe. However, when the electrical installation was done, a heavy vehicle accidentally drove over the ditch that contained the electrical to the pump house, and they needed to do a major repair job on that.
When we're irrigating, the head of the pod blows off. So it just blows off and shoots water 30 feet in the air. That's happened probably, 6 or 7 times out here.
But the last time it did it, when the pod blew, the coupler for the traveling gun came down. It came down not too far from hitting him, and that thing's heavy enough, it probably would have put him in the hospital if it didn't kill him. So
after about 2 years, there was a major blowout at the T where the feeder pipe meets the north and south pipe that contains the pods that are used by the traveling gun. At the T, when they shut off the water and dug down to the pipe, they found that they had not cemented the T like they said they did. The Lucky 3 crew found 3 unopened bags of cement around the pipes.
We did the repairs ourselves, the right way.
Unfortunately, the company that installed the pipe that feeds the traveling gun did not lay the pipe into the ditch properly. When pipe is laid into a trench and covered, it is vitally important to make sure that the surface the pipe sits on is as stable as possible. That's why the bottom of the trench should be bedded with gravel first. The ground will shift over time, and if you do not properly prepare this base, the pipe can have too much stress put on it when the ground shifts, and the pipe can burst at the joints. This is what happened down the line at the pods until they were all fixed. Rock was put in around them as they were repaired, but that still left the underground PVC pipe that was buried between the pods. The Lucky 3 crew dealt with these kinds of problems over several years. It is imperative that the irrigation system does not go down during the hay season, or you can conceivably lose your crop for the entire year.
So the original installers of that system didn't bed the pipe in gravel. Meredith called them out on that, and they made assurances that it wouldn't break on us. They even gave us a 2-year guarantee that nothing would break, but of course, the ground won't shift enough for anything to break until after that 2 years. After that, it didn't cause anything but issues for us. Seemed like for the first 10 years of the system, something broke every year, whether it be underground pipe broke or one of the pods broke. Even the T where we split off from the south field to the north field, that actually blew up out of the ground, and we were told that everything was going to be encased in concrete. And when we got over there and looked in it, they were just bags of concrete, not even poured out. They were still in the bag, just dropped behind the pipe, and that's what they thought was good enough to anchor that thing in.
Sometimes, no matter what you do, things just don't work out quite right, and one needs to be flexible in the way you approach the problems. This system has had problems for 13 years.
After the first cutting, the Lucky 3 ranch crew began irrigating, and things appeared to be going well until they spun the reel around to do the second half on the first pod section, and when the water was turned on, it blew the first northern pod at the end of the PVC pipe, and there was a major geyser. The water needed to be shut off, and the sprinkler head was reeled in using the hydraulics on the tractor.
It was a pretty normal summer day in 2020. And we were out moving some irrigation water like normal. Dad was out in the field adjusting the sprinkler, just got everything hooked up, and I was back at the irrigation pump house, and he said turn it on, so I turned the thing on like normal and hung up the phone, getting ready to walk out, get the phone call back, and here's my dad, turn off the phone or the water, the thing's going everywhere. And he's running, I'm like, what? Look out the door. And Dad's out there running around like a chicken with its head chopped off, going like this. And I was like, what the hell's going on? I saw the geyser going up and all that, so I reached in there and turned the switch off, and the pump shut off, and then the geyser were still going for a little bit because that pipe holds a lot of pressure. It bled off in a couple minutes, and so we went out there and found out what happened. The pipe the sleeve inside the concrete had broken off and shot up in the air, and the reason Dad was running around with his hands up in the air screaming like that was the thing damn near came down and hit him.
Well, I had a bad feeling in my stomach when we was out there turning on the irrigation system, and there must have been a crack or something inside the pipe down inside the concrete, because when we got it full pressure, the head blew off, and luckily it was tied to the inlet pipe to the sprinkler, because that held on to the part that went up in the air like a missile, and so I called Chad and told him to turn off the pump, but I still was able to get pictures of it. So yeah, I wasn't running around like a chicken with my head cut off. No, I was trying to get pictures. When we went to try to fix the pipe, we tried to fix it on top of the concrete by grinding out the pipe in the middle of the concrete so we could get it smooth inside to hook a coupler to it. But we just couldn't get it to hold pressure, so we ended up digging up the pipe and then putting a cap on it and then eliminating that pod from the irrigation.
After the water had been shut down, Steve had to get the water out of the pod hole with a sump pump before the mechanic was able to work on the pod. Steve and the mechanic tried to replace the pipe in the pod with a steel pipe, but this time it wouldn't hold, and it cracked the PVC feeder pipe that was buried underground. At that time, the Lucky 3 Ranch crew knew they were going to have to replace all the PVC pipe in the entire irrigation pipeline system with steel piping if they wanted to avoid any more issues with this system. Steve trenched out the end of the pipeline at the pod and readied the pipe to be capped.
PVC pipe kept exploding, and we had to spend a lot of money on maintenance, so we decided to put in the new steel pipe to get a longer lasting pipe for 30, 40, 50 years or whatever, instead of the 11 years we got out of the plastic pipe.
So the solution for that was to have a steel system put in so that we wouldn't have that problem again. We have a tether on the coupler now that's actually anchored into our pod, so if it ever does blow, it's tethered down to that ground, so it's not going to go up in the air like the last one did.
But she's not going to blow anymore.
That is, we would have to replace the pipe from the pond to the tee, west to east, and the pipe that feeds the pods from the tee to the north border and from the tee to the south border of the hayfield. The pipe that would need to be replaced will be 3,900 feet of pipe.
That was the original plastic pipe system they put in there. We have since replaced that with a steel pipe system, and that is obviously much stronger. The joints on that one are welded, where the plastic pipe system everything was a slip joint, nothing was even glued together, it was just slipped together. And then the steel pipe obviously is stronger than the plastic, so it can handle the pressures we put through the system without breaking and blowing apart. That pipe, when you're running that much pressure through there, it'll suck air in when you're not using it, and it'll push to one end, and it'll cause problems with the traveling gun working properly. So we had a couple vents on the old system, but not anywhere near what we needed. So when we put the new one in, every pod has its own vent system so that it won't cause any water lock or airlock system or problems that we did with the last plastic system we had. We left a ditch around the perimeter of the field because our neighbors still flood irrigate. So that would act as a catch for their flood irrigation overflow, and that stopped that from coming out into our field and overwatering some areas, causing puddles where they could kill off the grass and causing the ground to get uneven.
The Lucky 3 Ranch crew thought they could get most of the hayfields irrigated for a second cutting with the pipe capped off, and put off the replacement of the underground 8-inch PVC pipe until after second cutting. But that was not meant to be. Colorado was in a drought, and the water was cut off in mid-August, which ceased irrigation opportunities altogether.
The fires last year affected the crops in. They blocked out a lot of the sun. Obviously, the grass needs sun to grow. It dropped a lot of ash on the ground, which wasn't doing, the grass wasn't doing too well with all that extra, chemicals in the air. And then it was also a very hot year, so we ran out of water before we were able to complete all our irrigations for the year. So it was kind of a double whammy as far as the grass goes last summer. Well, the fires last year were bad enough that if you think of a cloudy, rainy day, as far as the sun being blocked out, that's what it looked like, but everything was yellow just from the clouds and all the ash in the air. It was a pretty miserable time. It was very hard to breathe at that time.
To add insult to injury, fires began in the mountains, and the smoky air and ash dampened the growth of the remaining grass. An optimistic Lucky 3 Ranch crew decided to get started on the replacement of the traveling gun PVC pipe right away, instead of waiting until late fall.
So when we put our new steel system in, there's actually a dog leg in the line. When the original system was put in there, our T's with shutoffs in it to go north and south was about 20 feet in the field. So we'd have to drive over that with our swather, lift up, and make sure we didn't catch any of those parts with the swather. Not only would that damage the underground irrigation system, but it'd do some pretty serious damage to the swather. So we had a dog leg put in for the new system to get it closer to the road so that we can avoid that much easier and know where that's at all times when we're going across that. In the new steel system, we also installed a drain system so we can drain the entire line out. And what we did was we took an extra 2-inch pipe from the very south end of it, which is where everything's kind of downhill from that, and we ran it to the ditch on the side of the road so we can crack open a valve and drain the whole system out in the wintertime instead of letting it sit in that steel pipe all winter.
We planned on a second cutting, but with all the forest fires and stuff blocking the sun and prohibiting the grass from growing, we decided to go ahead and start replacing the irrigation.
The state shut down water, so it made sense for us to jump onto the replacement of the irrigation system instead of waiting until it got colder. Weather becomes more unpredictable. You get in the fall and the wintertime, ground freezes up on you, makes it harder to dig. So it made sense to do it at that point instead of waiting around being mad at Mother Nature and the state for shutting us off on irrigation. So we got proactive and did what we needed to. We were happy that we didn't have to start this big project in the fall. Makes it a lot easier for us to get stuff done.
The replacement of the entire pipe system for the traveling gun was no small project and was incredibly expensive. But the Lucky 3 ranch crew pitched in and got some help from some amazing subcontractors. The job of trenching 3,900 feet and filling the trenches with gravel was completed in a month. 2 backhoes were used for the trenching in order to be ready to go when the steel pipe was finally delivered.
We ended up renting a backhoe, and it proved to be so handy for us to have here that we decided to just go ahead and buy one outright. Doing a pipe install like that it's a pretty involved process. First, we have to dig our trench, and this time we ended up putting it in about 4 foot in the ground. We had to have enough room for when our pods were at, the welders with the pipe system could get in there and work around it. So every place that we had a pod, we had to dig a bigger area out so that they had room to work in. Then we had a welding crew come out, and they laid out the pipe, and we had multiple welders working on it. And what we'd have happen was one welder would go through and make the initial weld to connect everything together, and that's called a root pass. And then we'd have another welder come in, and they'd do a cap pass on that, and that would lock that steel pipe together. So the two welding teams working together were able to get all the welding done on this project in about 2 weeks, which was actually quite a bit faster than what they even did when they did the plastic system. The tape on all the welds, that's a sealing tape so that the weld, there's no coating on that, and that helps protect it from rusting. We also had what's called an anode put onto the system, and there's multiple anodes throughout the system, and what that does is that's a sacrificial metal so that the corrosion will hit the anode instead of the steel pipe, and that should preserve the pipe for longer. And we're estimating we get 30 to 50 years depending on what the ground acidity and all that stuff is before this pipe even gives us any issues. When they did the welding on the pipes, they did it on ground level, and so we had a whole line of pipe that we needed to get dropped in the ground. So we had a backhoe and a track hoe, and they had slings on the buckets of it, and they would pick up the pipe in those slings and they'd rotate it over the ditch, and then they'd drive down, and as they were driving down, that pipe would fall into the ditch, and then they were able to take it and kind of snake it in there and lower the pipe into the ditch. When the pods were all put in the ground and we were starting to backfill everything, we had to isolate where our shutoff valves for every pod was in our air vents. So we took a 4-foot culvert, or a 2-foot culvert, and a 4-foot sonotube, and made a system so that, basically a tube so we can fill those full of concrete to protect that from being backfilled with the dirt. And then so it'd be able to take the abuse from the tractors driving over the top of them or anything like that.
The pipe needed to be welded by the first welders, followed by the second welders that strengthened and finished the joints. Then the pipe from the pump house to the tee was lowered into the trench with a backhoe and a track hoe with a sling of rollers.
It was miraculous the way the track hoe laid that pipe right down into the center of the trench without anything breaking. It was truly a sight to see.
The pipe at the pump house was then aligned, and the pipe from north to south was laid and met the pump house pipe at the tee. Steve followed behind as they laid the pipe and backfilled the trenches. He left the openings where the pods would be because they would have to be fit such that they were flush with the hayfield. This would make sure the ground was flat and there would be no interference with the hay equipment. At one point, they had to dig around one of the irrigation culverts that delivered water to the neighbors' fields. The Lucky 3 ranch crew designed a vent system at the pods and a drainage system for the traveling gun pipe network that would make it much easier and more efficient than it previously had been.
The neighbor's irrigation runs across a 25-acre field, and it's a buried pipe, so we had to dig up to that, cut it, and then keep digging, and then they laid the pipe inside, and then we had to put the culvert back together on the pipe.
The welders left for a week and allowed Steve the time to catch up with the backfilling. Then they came back to measure, cut, and fit the caps on the pods.
As soon as they got the pipe in, as soon as they give me the okay to backfill, I pushed the dirt in the trench and started packing.
Steve then had to cut sections of sonotubes and culverts to encase the pods and got them ready for cement to make sure they were solidly installed.
Sonotube is a form for pouring concrete. We put those around the pods to protect the pods. So if they get hit by a tractor or something like that, the concrete takes the blow.
And it's a faster way for us to do that than building wooden forms. They come pre-shaped, or they're round, so we just notch them around our pipe and drop them in the ground.
Chad put a 2x4 across the top of each pour space to keep the sonotube and culvert from collapsing, while the cement was poured into the 10-pod encasements. Steve carefully guided the trough of the cement truck at each pod to make sure it was done right. Chad came behind and leveled the top of the pour. The Lucky 3 team came out to watch the final process of this enormous job that had been done in record time.
Yeah, so we put the sonotube in to help brace the risers on the pods. Not like what they did before, where they just took bags of concrete and threw them in a hole and called that good. The outside part of it's called a sonotube. It's a layered, kind of like a cardboard thing. They use those in all kinds of construction processes for like skyscrapers. You build your deck, you use different size sonotubes. And then we wanted a smooth wall on the inside of that. And so to get it strong enough so it can take the pressure from the concrete being on the opposite direction, pushing in on it so it doesn't collapse it, we used a rigid culvert with rings on it so that it would lock in place. Lots of people say that there's ways, cheaper ways to do things, but that's not always the best way necessarily. We ran into that with our irrigation pond. When we built that, we had bentonite clay lined in there, and they told us that it would seal off and keep water from seeping through, and we found out that was true for about 2 years. After that, we started seeing some seepage coming out of the pond, and it got so bad to the point where we had to watch a part of our field across the road that was actually starting to flood all the time because whenever water was in that pond. So we made the decision to rip out all that bentonite clay and the riprap that was in there and put a plastic mechanical barrier in there to retain that water.
Yeah, it was even leaking water around the dam and everything.
Yeah, it had eaten everything, all the dirt around the dam, so we had to yank that out and rebuild that twice. One of the issues that we were worried about when we put the mechanical liner in there is it was pretty slick when it was dry, and we could only imagine how slick it was going to be when it was wet. So we had ladders placed. I think there's about 6 of them all the way around the pond, so if you do slip in there, there's a way for you to climb out.
We dug a trench all the way around the pond, 2 foot off the shoulder. Then we laid the liner inside the pond, and then we brought the liner up over the shoulder and laid in the trench we dug around the pond, and then backfilled it, and that's what holds the liner in place. And we put sandbags in the bottom of it until we got water inside the pond to hold the bottom of the pond down. And everything was sealed to the concrete on the pump house and the inlet over here. They put metal brackets around to the concrete and then slid the liner up inside and then put another metal bracket, bolted another metal bracket across the front of it.
It had a gasket, a neoprene gasket that sealed off between the concrete and the metal. I think they said it'll last a minimum of 20 years for weather. Obviously there's issues that could come up with equipment hitting the edge of it and cutting it up, or an animal, deer come in there, they can cut a hole in it for sure with their hooves, but they can come patch all that up, so it should last us a good long while. A lot easier to replace this liner with another liner than yanking out all that riprap and gravel we had in there before and replacing it with that. We're gonna go swimming with the frogs and we were gonna swim with the geese, but the geese are gone.
After waiting for an opportunity to redo the surface of the pond for a year and a half, the pond was finally dry enough to get the heavy equipment down into it to clear the last of the rock. Then they had to smooth out the pond surface to receive the plastic liner that would replace the bentonite that had leaked over the years. This was one enormous job.
The pond had to be smoothed out with the ground. All the rocks had to be taken out so it didn't puncture the liner, but we also put down a felt pad underneath the liner too to help stop some of that.
When we had the traveling gun system originally put in, there was a clay liner put in that we were told would seal up and lock the water from leaking through. It just wasn't maybe true for maybe the first 2 years, and then after that we started seeing seepage through the ditch, or through the pond actually. So we decided to go ahead and put a rubber liner in there, so we had a mechanical barrier instead of a natural barrier. So we had to strip all the riprap that was on the side there to stop the erosion of the natural surface there, pull all that out, pull all the rock out, and smooth everything out so that they can come put a new plastic liner in.
There were a couple of windy days, so they put in sandbags to hold down the plastic liner. Ditches had to be dug all the way around for the liner to be held after filling them with dirt once the liner was installed. Since this was a potentially dangerous situation for anyone falling into the pond when it was finally filled with water, ladders were installed all the way around in strategic places. If anyone fell in, they could crawl out easily.
The pond liner gets really slick when it's wet. We couldn't really live with ourselves if somebody got in there and couldn't get out and drowned, so we put ladders in certain areas of the pond so that if somebody does get in there, there is an access for them to get out.
The liner was anchored around the pump house and secured so it would not leak. After the liner was fully installed, the crew came out to hook up the irrigation pond shutoff float. This automatically shuts off the pump in case the main carry ditch runs out of water, so the pump will not burn up. With the system complete, the Lucky 3 Ranch crew can proceed into the next irrigation season with full confidence. No more geysers.
Now that we have a pond that actually holds water all year round, if we get a cold enough break or cold spell in the weather, it freezes up enough, we might think about ice skating on it.
Although there was not a second cutting in August of 2020, one could still hope for a second cutting in September if the hay grows enough. Colorado is blessed with almost 360 days of sunshine throughout the year. The temperatures will determine whether one can cut in September or even sometimes in October. Second cutting hay is generally more sparse but less stemmy than the first cutting. It creates smaller windrows, dries faster, and is quicker to put up. After the second cutting, the crew will do one more pass with irrigation so the ground is sufficiently moistened going into the winter. This will keep the dormant grass from dying.
Well, we're all done cutting, baling, stacking, and putting it all in on the second cutting, but that's not all we have to do. We're not quite done yet. We've got to assess the shape of the field going into the winter. It needs to have some moisture in it to keep the grass from dying, but so it can go in and become dormant for the winter and come back in the spring. Chad, can you tell us a little bit about that and how that works?
Yeah, so we try to irrigate as late as possible. The ditch company shuts off water whenever they either run out of water or the state will say no more irrigation water for the year, and that could be sometime between October and November. It differs every year. So if we can get water on it in October, we'll put water on it and let it go into bed it into winter that way.
Like to aerate after the second cutting is
Do that before you irrigate it then?
afterwards usually.
Makes it a lot easier to get it done.
Getting out here in the field and doing all the outside work when the weather's really good.
Yeah, it's just nice to get out of the office and out in the field and be outside and enjoy the outdoors.
Sometimes they don't have much water left at the end of the year and they might cut us off. And it usually takes us about 3 weeks to cover all of the fields, right?
Yeah, it takes us 3 to 4 weeks depending on what the weather does, because if the wind comes up real hard, we can't irrigate because it'll blow it in the areas that we don't want water and in the areas that we are trying to get water on, and they'll stay dry. They've shut us down in September before because the water was not in the reservoirs or in the river, so state says you're done and no more water. When we had those fires a couple years ago, that's what happened. We put down, every pass probably 4 inches of water, so that'd be 4 inches for every acre. For every pass we do with the irrigation system. We'll speed it up, cut it in half, or even maybe go to 1 inch just to get enough water on there to keep the grass from going dormant or dying off.
Where we thought when we put in this pond for the irrigation system we have now with the traveling gun, we thought we might, if it got cold enough, we would have an ice skating rink in the wintertime, and it hasn't been cold enough to do that yet, but it may very well be that we can't hold water in the irrigation pond all winter.
Yeah, state law says with irrigation water, it can't sit in a retaining pond for more than, I believe it's 24 hours or 72 hours. I can't remember exactly which one it was, but yeah, it's got to be, once it comes in there, they want it moving. They don't want you taking, 70 or 80 acre feet of water and putting it in a pond somewhere, and it just sits there and evaporates in the air and doesn't get used for agricultural purposes, which is what it was intended for.
Right. So we have a lot of things to check going into the the end of the year, and things to do.
Yep.
As we shut everything down.
Yeah, we gotta, look at the fields like we assessed them earlier and see if there's bare spots. We might have to throw some more seed onto those areas. Because we do harvest the hay before it goes out to seed, it doesn't follow its natural cycle that way and put seed down like Mother Nature would intend it to.
It kind of interferes every once in a while.
Yep, so when, the grass will tell us, hey, when, it starts thinning out, we got to put seed on it, so
right.
Just got to be observant.
And that's how it happens at the Lucky 3 Ranch.
Yeah.
The crew will do a final pass on cleaning all the equipment and putting it away into the equipment barn, where it will be kept safe from the winter weather. In October, the irrigation system is shut down, the equipment is stored, and the fields are fertilized, aerated, and harrowed for winter. The Lucky 3 hay season of 2020 was a difficult year at best. However, by the end of the season, they knew with confidence for the next 2 years that they would have plenty of hay in storage for both their livestock and the horses, mules, and donkeys at the Hearts and Horses Therapeutic Riding Center. For the Lucky 3 Ranch, November and December is always the time to decorate and celebrate the blessings of yet another successful year. Happy Thanksgiving and Merry Christmas to all.